The night she said it, the fence between our yards felt thinner than a whisper, and I knew if I leaned closer I might fall into a story I wasn't ready to leave. She was standing on her side with a mug cupped in both hands, steam rising like a confession she couldn't take back. We'd been neighbors for years, exchanging nods and borrowed tools, waving across seasons. Her name was Mara. Mine is Jonah. Ordinary people, ordinary lives, until ordinary suddenly wasn't enough. When she spoke, her voice didn't tremble, but the words did. She said she hadn't had a man in 2 years, not like a joke, not like an invitation, but like someone setting a heavy box down after carrying it alone for too long. The fence creaked as I shifted my weight, unsure whether to step closer or step away, unsure whether help meant crossing a line or simply sitting with someone in their quiet. I told her I was sorry she'd been lonely, and she smiled in that way people do when they're grateful you didn't make it weird. She explained more then, how the last 2 years weren't empty because of the absence of touch, but because of the absence of being seen. Her days were full work, errands, caring for her mother on weekends, but her nights were hollow. She talked about the way silence gets loud after midnight, how you can be surrounded by neighbors and still feel like you're the only one awake in the world. I listened, really listened, the way you do when you realize the moment matters. She asked if I would help her, and before my mind ran ahead of itself, she clarified. Help didn't mean fixing anything or filling a space that belonged to someone else. It meant company. It meant honesty. It meant choosing not to pretend that needing someone was a weakness. I felt my shoulders drop, relief mixing with something warmer. I told her I could help with that. I told her I could show up. The fence, suddenly, felt like a promise instead of a barrier. We started small. Tea on opposite sides of the fence turned into tea at the same table, the fence line replaced by a shared porch light. We talked about the boring things first, because boring things are safe. Weather. Recipes. The way her dog tilted his head when confused. Then the conversations deepened, not by force but by trust. She told me about her divorce, how it ended quietly, like a song fading out rather than crashing. I told her about my habit of leaving lights on so the house wouldn't feel empty. We laughed more than I expected. Laughter, it turns out, is a kind of courage. The challenge came not from what we felt, but from what we feared. One night she pulled back, worried that leaning on me would make her forget how to stand on her own. Another night I hesitated, afraid of becoming a temporary solution to a permanent ache. We named those fears out loud, and naming them shrank them. We set boundaries, not walls but guardrails, agreeing that whatever we were building would move at the pace of comfort, not loneliness. Help, we decided, meant walking beside each other, not carrying. Over weeks, something steady took root. We cooked dinners that went wrong and laughed while eating them anyway. We took evening walks where the sky changed colors like it was practicing hope. The fence still stood, but it no longer defined us. It simply reminded us where we'd started, two people brave enough to speak a truth into the air and wait to see if it landed gently. The morning everything changed began with a knock that sounded like a heartbeat, and I opened the door knowing that whatever happened next would ask me to be honest all over again. She stood there with the same mug, same steam, but a different expression, clear, resolved. She said she'd slept better than she had in years, not because she wasn't alone, but because she wasn't pretending. She thanked me for helping in the way she needed, and then she surprised me by asking what I needed. The question caught me off guard. I realized I'd been so focused on showing up that I hadn't asked myself the same thing. I told her I needed time. Time to see if what we felt could carry the weight of real life. Time to make sure we weren't just easing each other's nights while avoiding our days. She nodded, understanding etched into her smile. We decided to keep choosing each other, but consciously, not out of fear of silence. We planned a small trip, nothing dramatic, just a weekend where we could test our rhythm away from familiar fences. There were moments on that trip when old doubts resurfaced. A misunderstanding over directions. A quiet dinner where neither of us knew what to say. But we leaned into those moments instead of away, treating them like bridges rather than cracks. We learned how the other apologized, how the other needed reassurance, how love doesn't erase loneliness so much as teach it to rest. When we returned, the fence looked the same, but we weren't. We hosted a small gathering for neighbors, laughter spilling over the yard, proof that connection multiplies when shared. Mara caught my eye across the crowd, and I saw not a confession or a need, but a partner in the making. Help had grown into something sturdier: respect, patience, and the courage to keep choosing. On a quiet evening, months later, we stood by the fence again, hands resting on the weathered wood. She said she was glad she'd spoken that night. I said I was glad I'd listened. We didn't promise forever, because forever isn't built on promises, it's built on presence. And as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows that met in the middle, I understood the message we'd been writing together. Needing someone doesn't make you weak, and helping doesn't mean losing yourself. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, and the kindest thing someone else can do is stay.